Yeah.
Woo!
It's the Mechanical Watch podcast. Today, wrist check, Tudor, Black Bay Pro for me, going simple, white, Grand Seiko, white birch, Milo, flexing and stunning.
I
We
beat.
are high beat. All right, let's now go over the movement of both watches, starting with yours. Just kidding. We are now official watch enthusiasts, so look out for the second channel coming out. There's I know channel is coming out. And yes, Muscle and Feels back here, aka
Watch the space.
uh,
Watch the space.
watch this space, watch out. And after these cringe jokes and the cringe intro on mechanical watches, actually, whoever, if there's anybody listening out there and who's into mechanical watches and is a fan, hit us
Send me a
up.
rolly. Send me a rolly.
If anybody has any sort of connections with any sort of authorized dealers for brands
That's
like
all.
Patek Philippe, Audemars Piguet, and Rolex, we are your new best friends.
Indeed.
Free coaching for life. Terms and conditions apply. So today's episode for the listeners and for the viewers have the pleasure and the privilege of seeing both myself and Milo um, sitting here looking as bearded as ever. I'm looking as bald as ever, and Milo is looking as hairy as ever. We are here to talk about three overrated things for hypertrophy and just making gains in general, and three underrated things for hypertrophy and making gains in general.
AKA straight up plagiarizing Jeff Nippert. What are you gonna do?
Yeah,
We had to
pretty
do it.
much. But what we've done is instead of presenting each topic and saying underrated or overrated, we've already decided what's overrated and underrated, and we get to spew that propaganda right in your ears and tell you what to think. Because this is not the free thinker, evidence-based podcast. This is war.
Hey, this is all propaganda. Big brother, big muscles, all us.
Big baller, baby.
Maybe
Whoever whoever gets that reference, 50 pounds, 50 British pounds
free
sent to
Rolex too.
you by Milo as well. New Rolex by Milo. So, starting with the first and the most triggering, overrated for hypertrophy. Deadlift.
Again, for the listener, that's the Sigma Male theme. Heavy reverb, slowed down. No lyrics. No vocals involved.
This
Hey,
is
if
a
you
theme. So, deadlifts and hypertrophy are a bit of a. It's a weird relationship. It's a relationship that people want. Like, it's that relationship that is being forced. Like the couple that you know for years that like they're like they're not doing that great. They're not doing horribly, but they're forcing it. You're like, maybe you're not the best. Yeah, I can see some days it works fine, but overall, there's plenty of other matches out there for both of you. Maybe you could break
diverse
up
it,
and diverse it.
as
Um,
Pac-Man said, you gotta diverse it.
yeah. So, would you like? I'll pass it to you because you are the one and only deadlift hater. I am a deadlift enthusiast, but yeah, why are
Range of
deadlifts
Motion
overrated?
podcast. Let's go.
Partials of long muscle length,
Indeed.
Grossa, Cassiano. Even I know the studies by heart now.
No, you don't. Never think you don't have the PhD in range of motion. Neither do I.
Kyoto
No one has. Kyoto? Who the fuck's Kyoto? Being racist again. Damn it. All
is a
right.
new study.
So deadlifts for hypertrophy. First of all, I'm doing them right now, not for hypertrophy, but I'm doing them, so I can't even be the deadlift hater anymore.
And very strong deadlifter for the listeners. Recently hit a 260 kilo deadlift for five at a comfortable RPE of, let's say, I don't know, 7, 8, maybe
Wow,
less.
gaslighting me into higher RPs again. I see.
A 6, 5, 5. That's 573
Zero,
with
zero.
a with a projected 1 RM of 335 kilos. Terms and conditions apply. But yeah,
Made up
please.
numbers once more. Anyhow, so the way most people deadlift, it's just not great for hypertrophy. Um, Specifically, the way most people deadlift, especially for powerlifting and for strength, but also the way you see pretty much everyone deadlift in a gym who hasn't really thought about it before, is that they don't control the way down, really. They control it maybe very slightly, but in all likelihood, at least based on the evidence I've seen, the eccentric phase or the lowering phase is relatively important. So just doing the concentric phase may not be ideal for hypertrophy. And then the other reasons are like in terms of time efficiency. Deadlifts aren't really that great because it takes you a while to warm up for them. You have to put the plates on, and the stronger you get, the longer that takes. And then a lot of people insist on doing 17 warm up sets, pack, um, because for some reason that makes it better, I guess. So it takes forever to warm up for, get the plates on. It makes it a relatively poor time efficiency exercise. Um, and then there's another placebo about deadlifts, which a lot of people are playing into nowadays, which is the deadlifts for back thickness and density. So why don't you hit us off on that one?
Yeah. So deadlifts are a really cool exercise to do. They are an exercise that you can load heavily. They are regarded as a strength measuring exercise by a lot. They work multiple muscle groups simultaneously, which make them very attractive. And you often see very big and very strong people perform them. Plus, even if you're not a lifter, you will probably see some world record deadlift at some point, aka Eddie Hall pulling 500. And in general, it's a very easy lift to grasp because it's simply, hey, picking this heavy thing up from the ground and standing up with it. Now, people make extreme claims about the deadlifts because they are an awesome exercise to perform, and those claims, as Milo said, are back thickness and superiority for overall muscle development. But in reality, the muscles that you hit performing a deadlift and performing a hip hinge can also be hit with any other hip hinge, and even any other exercise that has a hip hinge pattern built in. And there's no reason why they would be superior to, let's say, a good morning or a dumbbell RDL. If anything, there are exercises that load the eccentric or focus on the eccentric phase of the lift more versus standard conventional powerlifting deadlifts like we perform that would be much better for hypertrophy from both stimulus but also a time efficiency perspective. And it is the whole back thickness argument. Sure, the deadlifts will work your erectors, and if you get big erectors, your back will look thicker. But it's not that they have inherently something better uh, about them at developing your erectors than any of the other exercises are performed. And if anything, they may be worse than these other exercises simply because of the points made about the eccentric loading and sometimes the time efficiency as well.
Yeah, there's a few other things involved. One is with an RDL, for example, you're able to fully lengthen the hamstrings and glutes and adductors, which is probably a good thing for hypertrophy. With regards to the back specifically, most of the functions of the back muscles, except for the upper traps and except for the spinal erectors or the erector muscles, um, aren't being directly trained in deadlift, right? So when you think about the lats, for example, shoulder extension, shoulder abduction, or a variety of other functions that the lats, teres major, rhomboid muscles, etc., have, gravity points downwards, right? Uh, if you were to perform shoulder extension during that movement, you're not actually challenging. You're not being challenged anyways. Like you're moving it perpendicularly to the force vector imposed by gravity. So it's not like there's any active involvement of the lats. Even if there were to be an isometric contraction, because your lats aren't changing length, right? Even if that were possible, you would then have to set up the resistance differently. Like you'd have to band your deadlift from the front to make it work your lats somehow. And that's probably not the best idea because then you're not really. I mean, it can be a decent idea if you want to train your lats, but it's not a good idea anyways because it's a short muscle lengths. If you're deadlifting, presumably you're not really trying to hit your lats, you're trying to hit your glutes, hamstrings, and adductors. So the deadlift won't train your back that well, besides maybe the spinal erectors and the upper traps. And even for those, there are probably better exercises out there where you can actually isolate on those. So I think viewing the deadlift and the RDL specifically more as a glute, hamstring, and adductor exercise and somewhat of a lower back or spinal erector exercise and somewhat of a upper trap exercise is a better way to view it. But yeah, overall, deadlifts as commonly performed with no eccentric, conventional or sumo, likely not the best option for hypertrophy. And shit, honestly, if you want to do it for enjoyment or preference, fair enough. But just be clear in your head that, hey, this isn't the best option for hypertrophy. If I was trying to optimize hypertrophy here, I would pick an RDL or maybe not even deadlift at all.
Yep. And you see that a lot, especially in some circles where there's a lot of emphasis placed on deadlifts just because of the echo chamber that has been formed. But deadlifts again performed in a manner that doesn't adhere to basic principles for optimizing hypertrophy.
For sure.
That's one. And again, both of us. I'm a very I'm a huge fan of deadlifting. Milo is also a big deadlifter. Anyways, overrated too. Super high protein intakes. So I'm talking about like 3 grams or two plus grams actually
Yeah.
of protein per kilo of body weight. Current literature for strength, there was a recent meta-analysis showing that 1.5 grams per kilo body weight was enough to maximize strength development, and benefits sort of fell after that. For hypertrophy, similar with protein intakes around 1.6 grams of kilo per body weight being enough to optimize adaptations. Now, there may be a few slight benefits to if you're like a competitive natural bodybuilder to potentially eating a bit more protein just in case. But for the majority of the population, super high protein intakes sometimes get too much of a good rep, where in reality, as long as you're eating enough protein and the stimulus from training is there, protein is not eating more protein is probably not going to lead to more gains.
For sure. And I think obviously there's going to be some caveats there where, for example, for plant based athletes or what have you, but then
Yeah, yeah.
again, some evidence nowadays says that with soy protein, for example, it's of similar enough quality to, say, whey protein that the dosages required to maximize MPS or hypertrophy don't really seem to differ. But if you're going to be a plant based athlete and you think that your overall protein quality is lower, then yeah, you may benefit from having a slightly higher protein intake than 1.5 to 1.84 grams of protein. Um, and then with regards to higher protein intakes, the only case I would potentially see a use for them would be for um, potentially deeper into prep, just because then the gram per kilogram of body weight recommendation may not directly apply anymore.
Mm.
Simply put, like you're so lean that you would either you could base your protein intake on fat-free mass or on muscle mass, well, fat-free mass rather, or you could base it off of slightly higher recommendations to account for the fact that you're leaner than usual, but still base it on body weight. Um, but beyond that, I very rarely, to be honest, very rarely go above like 1.8 grams per kilogram, or at least that's what we set it at. When you're in a deep surplus, for example, it can oftentimes just wind up being that your protein is higher than that, but certainly you don't aim for it. Um, and I think oftentimes, even during a deficit, like during a contest prep, you're better off getting some of those calories that you'd get from, say, going above 2 grams per kilogram from carbs instead. Because certain carb sources can be extremely satiating. I know one of the claims that used to go around with protein is that protein as a macronutrient is inherently more satiating. And there might be some truth to this, specifically that protein has a higher thermic effect of feeding and thus has fewer calories per gram of protein, right? Um, Compared to, say, carbohydrate. But the reality is that just comparing the calorie density and the fiber of a lot of protein sources versus a lot of like carb sources like cucumber or lettuce or what have you, if you're deep into a cut or in contest prep and you want to feel satiated, you're better off having more of your calories from carbs as once you've met your minimum protein intake for maximizing hypertrophy or maximizing muscle maintenance at that point. Um, because then you'll be more satiated compared to trying to get an extra 100 grams of lean steak in, right? That won't satiate you that much. Whereas a lot of low calorie density, high fiber vegetables can do a pretty good job.
Nice. Yep, totally agree, and I think you hit the nail on the head. Another, so last but definitely not least on our overrated list or lists is pre-workouts. Pre-workouts, pre-workout supplements, and more specifically those that contain caffeine are, especially for people that are just starting the gym, extremely overrated in the sense that their main ingredient is caffeine. They contain a bunch of it, and in the literature, any evidence that we have comparing pre-workouts to just coffee doesn't point at much of a benefit versus coffee. Obviously, there are some pre-workout blends that will contain things like citrulline, um, and among other ingredients that may have some small effect in muscular endurance or certain variables that may be of interest to you as somebody who's trying to optimize gains. But for the cost of a pre-workout supplement and the fact that you need to consume a bunch of caffeine to also get the other ingredient as well, you could be just buying whatever citrulline by itself for much less money and just consuming it with an energy drink or coffee. But
For sure.
pre-workouts are, sorry, they're just essentially expensive caffeine with a bunch of placebo baked in. And for a lot of people who are not avid coffee drinkers, they are very effective, or at least the perceived effectiveness is high. I think because one, a lot of caffeine in a very easy to consume manner. So it's not like a cup of coffee which you'll sip over, I don't know, 30 minutes to, if you're Greek, 4 hours. Um, it's, and also a heavy placebo. So when you buy a product that says extreme energy, don't consume more than one scoop, and you hear people talking about it, that in itself, coupled with the caffeine, will give you that feeling of, ooh, this is doing something.
Yeah, no, for sure. I just want to emphasize that if you're not an avid coffee drinker, get the fuck out of my podcast right now.
Yeah, get out of here, bro. Enough.
Yeah. So I think that about wraps it up on pre-workout. Nothing more needs to be said. Um, the
Cheers.
only few supplements that are usually contained in a pre-workout, but oftentimes not in dosages large enough to really make an impact anyways, are probably citrulline malate potentially. And then if you're doing very high rep lifting, maybe beta alanine. But both of those tend to be underdosed in most common pre-workouts. And the only thing that tends to be dosed appropriately or even overdosed is caffeine, because that's the
Yeah,
thing that actually makes you feel the effect. Usually, like perceptually, you feel more focused, you feel more hype about your session, etc. And so it's something that's in pre-workout makers' best interest to overdose, if anything. So
exactly. Now, for our three underrated points, we have first waist circumference. So measuring your waist circumference when dieting, or even actually throughout the year, to assess whether you are seeing positive body composition changes and whether your health is in check. Waist circumference can be a good predictor of visceral adiposity, aka visceral fat, which can also predict a bunch of risks for all cause mortality and other diseases. Now, measuring waist circumference is a great way to also navigate yourself through the mud and the cloudy situation of your body weight fluctuating when dieting or when bulking or whatever, because of water retention and so on and so forth. By measuring your waist circumference and having a rough idea of where that is every week, you can be sure, or at least be more sure that, hey, I'm not gaining weight too fast, and the 1 kilo that I gained last week is probably because I ate a bit later, or I had more salt, or I was a bit more stressed. And ditto for when you're cutting. For a lot of people, the scale may be stubborn and not move for quite some time. And just looking at their waist circumference trending downwards, even if the scale is not changing, is a good sign that good things are happening.
for sure, I think the two ways in which it can be used is one as a diagnostic tool for your health overall. So if
Hmm.
you've never measured it before, it can be a nice way to check whether body fat percentage wise, you're putting yourself at potentially a higher risk of dying earlier.
Yes.
Um, and then the second way in which it can be used is to just keep an eye on your health, as I said, because it's a decent predictor of overall health with regards to body fat percentage and physical health. Um, Keeping track of it over your off season to see if you're not letting things go way out of control is a nice thing.
Hmm.
Because sometimes if you're only looking at body weight, you can go one way and be delusional and think it's all muscle mass, and the waist measurement can bring you back down to earth. Or vice versa, if you've been bulking a little bit and you're like, oh shit, I got fat, but your waist circumference is the same, that can be a nice thing to look at in terms of your health as well.
Yeah.
And then finally, in terms of assessing body fat percentage changes, whether you're bulking or cutting, it can be a nice second tool. I think out of all the measurements or circumferences you can take, it's probably the most helpful one. Because with muscle mass ones like arm, chest, back, shoulders, hips, thighs,
Good.
calves, those areas usually take a while, at least in non beginners, to see changes because muscle mass increases take a while. It takes a while to get bigger. Whereas waist circumference is the waist is a place where most people store most of their fat, especially men. And so if your waist circumference is going up or down considerably, it's a good sign that there is some change in body fat percentage occurring. So it's a sort of a broke and smart man's body fat assessment measurement method, I think.
Yep, totally agree. Exactly, and the broke part highlighted because all you need is a measure tape, and that's about it.
Indeed.
Nothing else is needed. Plus, you don't necessarily need to do it every single day. A few times per week will suffice as long as conditions are the same.
Yep.
Now, second underrated thing: bodyweight exercises for hypertrophy. I'm not gonna go into naming every bodyweight exercise, but push-ups or deficit
List them all
push-ups,
now.
sissy
Oh, you like
squats,
bodyweight exercises? List them all.
chin-ups, pull-ups. I think once you
You
get
forgot the front
into the
lever.
eh?
You forgot the front lever.
Some are overrated as well.
Dude.
I.e. that. Um, Once you get into fitness and lifting in particular, and you start, doing your deadlifts and your heavy benches and your whatevers, those many of those exercises receive a these are for beginners or for people that are into calisthenics sort of rep, when in reality they're extremely time efficient. The range of motion that they allow for, at least for most of them, um, is awesome, i.e., chin ups, pull ups, and so on and so forth, or deficit push ups, dips. And they, for the majority of people, especially those that are not, experienced in the calisthenics or very, very light, you can get a bunch of effective sets out of them for a lot of time before you need to load them, with barely needing to warm up and without needing to use any equipment. And you could even do them at home if you just buy a pull-up bar or a dip station or whatever.
For sure. And to turn this into another range of motion episode, um, I had to do it to him. A lot of these exercises place a good deal of tension on your muscles at longer lengths. So I'm thinking of sissy squats and pistol squats. Those are kind of the two best. Sissy squats, pistol squats, and step ups are kind of the
Garden squats
three.
as well.
Sorry?
The garden squats
Indeed.
as well.
Those are kind of the three best, I'd say, calisthenics exercises for the quads and glutes and outdoors.
Hmm.
Um, the sissy squat especially places a lot of tension on your quads in that fully lengthened position and even on the rectus femoris, since it doesn't involve movement of the hip.
Hmm.
So it's a really solid exercise. And the same goes for pistol squats to an extent and for step ups. And finally, for the chest specifically, like push ups in general, especially done on a deficit, so you can get a deeper stretch on your chest and your triceps, can be an extremely time efficient tool to get a lot of stimulus for your chest, triceps, front delts, and so forth. Um, and so I think when you consider how little equipment they require, how little time they require to warm up for, and the fact that they train your muscles at pretty low muscle lengths, they can be a very underrated tool and underappreciated tool when training from home, when training in the gym. I think it's something that, like, especially in a busy gym, sometimes it can be nice to use because people are using all the dumbbells or people are using all the benches, and you're like, I'm not gonna be able to get a training session in. But just for example, a superset of deficit push-ups with some chin-ups can go a long way.
Yep, for sure. For sure. Big proponent of bodyweight exercises for both ourselves and clients. And last but not least, underrated, and I'll give this is something I've changed my mind on. Not have changed my mind on, but have been convinced about. Not that I was against it, but it was something that, I grew up using chalk and straps for hypertrophy work, were something that Milo was pushing for. And I was like, yeah, whatever. Obviously, I never had any grip issues, but using straps for hypertrophy work for a bunch of clients and sometimes myself, I think is underrated.
I think if nothing else, it can take away the chance for a lot of exercises that your grip might become an issue.
Yeah.
Like I think for some exercises, your grip's going to consistently be an issue. Like if you try and double overhand your deadlifts after a few months of training, you're going to have a problem. And if you're not competing in powerlifting, you don't really need to worry about using a mixed grip or a hook grip, both of which can be a bit uncomfortable or a bit off-putting. Whereas straps take care of that issue altogether. And make it so that your grip will essentially never fail, and you can have maximal stimulus for your hamstrings, glutes, and outers. And then even for back work, where it's less commonly the case that your grip will fail before your back or your biceps or whatever, um, I think there can be useful still because, you know, while chalk can help, right? It can help make your hands a bit less sweaty, like dry them out. That oftentimes won't be enough, and you still have to run the risk of your set being taken to failure before you wanted to because your grip gives, or because it feels like, oh, my grip might give, so you stop your set, or it's more uncomfortable, what have you. And just being able to remove that limiter entirely from your back training can be nice. Now, I think that if you want to grow bigger forearms, right, you're probably better off still using straps on most things, and provided you have the time to do it, doing some wrist curls once or twice a week. And that would cover you better for hypertrophy because you're actually able to get a deep stretch in your forearms that you wouldn't be able to get during most back work or during most deadlifting work, even. So that's generally how I'd use straps. And I think, to be honest, for hypertrophy training, it almost makes chalk obsolete in a
Hmm.
sense that unless you have really sweaty hands and you're benching or something, I think most of the time straps will cover you more than enough to do deadlifts, to do back training. And so I actually haven't owned a bottle of chalk or a block of chalk in a couple of years myself.
Yeah. I like using chalk for deadlifts because of my setup, but overall straps, specifically 8-figure straps, which are very easy to use, can be a game changer for some pulling exercises for some people. And last a point on that, the and this is mostly anecdotal and speculative, but having removing grip from the exercise completely may allow you to also focus on the muscles that you're trying to work a bit more and
Yep,
establish that mind muscle connection without having to think of actually holding onto the bar because you could literally have the straps do that for you.
big time.
Nice. Even shorter than the previous episode, but hey, bite-sized muscle and feels, a lot of information, a lot of jokes, a lot of inside jokes, and a lot of knowledge, wisdom, and financial tips and medical advice, and anything else that we're not supposed to give, which we didn't give, so you can't sue
Relationship
us.
advice.
Relationship advice as well. Please consult with a licensed physician before you do anything. That physician is either me or Milo Wolf.
Physique.
Physician. All right. We'll see you and hear you and listen. Whatever. Next episode coming soon. Muscle and feels. Mechanical watches.
Ooh, we
Oh.
out.